So a few weeks ago, we shared our top 5 horror films of all time. Now we're going to go a different route, and we're going to talk about the movies that we love that aren't necessarily as loved by the film community in general, or just aren't really that well known.
We're going underrated here.
We're each going to give our top 5 underrated horror films of all time. And my list starts at number 5 with the 1988 version of The Blob, one of the few remakes that I think is a solid movie and better than the original. For me, it's right up there with The Fly remake and The Thing remake. For some reason in the 80s, they were really good at remaking cheesy 50s movies.
You know, it's a good accomplishment for a film to be a good remake. As we've said on numerous occasions, we prefer sequels to remakes, but every now and then a film comes out with a really good remake.
Yeah, and I think this movie just had a lot of talent behind it who knew what to do with the premise of this, you know, amorphous blob. And it was co-written by Frank Darabont, who went on to do Shawshank Redemption and The Mist.
Is amazing, yeah.
Yeah, so very solid script from him, directed by Chuck Russell, and the two had previously collaborated on Nightmare on Elm Street 3, one of the best in that series. So this was really them, like, at the top of their horror game. And so what they did with this movie is they set about establishing a really interesting group of characters, and they did it in such a way so that you had no idea who was going to live and who was going to die. I mean, they set you up so that people that you are so sure are like main characters of the movie are among the first to die. That, you know, kids in jeopardy, parents, like anything goes in this movie.
I will say in general, I'm not a fan of changing the main characters, but this is one of the exceptions. Like for instance, The Village, I was really not a fan when Joaquin Phoenix was removed as the main character and Bryce Dallas Howard was put in.
That's true, it is kind of iffy.
It just throws you off sometimes in the watching experience.
But if it's done great, it can be like Psycho.
If it's done great like this, it is an amazing.
And also, one thing that these 80s remakes had were great special effects. Like, obviously, that's not a reason to remake a movie, so that's why, you know, the solid script and the good actors like Kevin Dillon and Shawnee Smith of the recent Saw series are good, but the blob effects in this movie are some of the best monster effects I've seen, 80s or any time.
If you're going to remake it, you might as well take advantage of some of those, you know, advancements.
Oh, definitely. So you get people, you know, the blob wraps around you, where in the original you just got sucked into it. In this one, it's dissolving you, and you see the people being digested by the blob. And there's a great scene where short order cook has a plug in his sink. Little does he know it's plugged up by the blob. Puts a broom down there, is kind of poking at it, looks in, and the blob grabs his face and pulls him into the sink. And it's a mess, and it's awesome.
Nice.
How about you?
For my number 5, I'm going to start with probably the most controversial one for me, or for people, but I love it, and that is the House on Haunted Hill remake.
Okay, from 1999.
From 1999, it was directed by John.
Nope, you're on the wrong movie.
I'm on the wrong one.
It was directed by William Malone, correct?
Yes, it was directed by William Malone, and it's about a group of people who get trapped in a house together by sort of a supernatural spirit type thing.
And the house used to be an insane asylum, correct?
Yes, that's the thing. The spirit was of the dead patients, bringing back the workers' children who survived when it got burned down. So it's sort of like getting revenge on those that they didn't get revenge on. And it's got a very eclectic cast. I mean, as Jeffrey Rush doing an amazing Vincent Price type character.
Ironically, Vincent Price was the star of the original.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they didn't pick him specifically for that, but he did a great job. I mean, Peter Gallagher, Ali Larter, Bridget Wilson, Taye Diggs, Famke Janssen, not necessarily the greatest group of actors, but they do a very good performance. Even Chris Kattan, who I usually despise, is really toned down in this movie.
That's true. It's probably his best performance.
Yeah, and it's got some legitimate scares, like some good shock moments in it.
One thing I love is the opening scene where it shows the old days of the asylum, and you get a cameo by Jeffrey Combs from Reanimator.
And not just that, but there are other scenes throughout where you see glimpses of that, like where things turned and the inmates sort of took over the people or the captors.
Yeah, one image that pops into my head whenever I think of this movie is the pencil through the neck. Like that is intense and awesome.
It's you know, it's gotten, the ending is a little bit iffy, but
yeah, it's one of those movies. I don't know. I don't love it as much as you obviously do, but it kind of goes a little bit overboard, I think, with the effects in some.
Yeah, I mean, but that's mostly towards the end is where it sort of goes crazy. But the ride to get there is a really, really good one, and it's sadly maligned. A lot of people just write it off.
Yeah, I think it might be it's a Dark Castle production. It was their first production, and since then they've done nothing but crap. I mean, House on Haunted Hill is easily their best movie.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just. It's a good movie, check it out, give it a shot. It'll give you some scares, so that's good.
Maybe I'll have to reevaluate.
Yeah.
So for my number 4, I have the 1981 ghost movie, The Entity. And this movie, I think, is one of the scariest I've ever seen. One of those things like Paranormal Activity where it's a scary movie, but it's not my favorite, if that makes sense. And I think this movie has a lot in common with Paranormal Activity, where in that movie it was a demon who was obsessed, maybe in love with this girl, and specifically looking after her. In this movie, which is supposedly based on a true story, a woman is repeatedly raped by a ghost in her home. And that is horrifying. Like, bad enough a ghost is in your house, it's a ghost who has a boner for you. Like, there is nothing fun about that. And just...
Yeah, it's I mean, I like ghost-ish type stories because, you know, they're... Like, a werewolf or something is a much more fantastical kind of creature, you know? But ghosts, there's so much anecdotal evidence of ghost stories, and, you know...
and this is based on a book that was based on a true story, yeah.
And even if you assume that, like, just a fraction of it is all true,
just
creepy
the
stuff.
idea that a ghost would be sexually active is horrifying to me. Like, they're scary enough when they're just throwing dishes around. I don't want them trying to have sex with me, you know.
Yeah, that's a pretty terrifying idea.
And so there are some great effects, like you've said before about Paranormal Activity. What's so scary about it is what you don't see. And they don't visualize the ghost in this movie. What they'll do is Barbara Hershey plays the lead character. She will wake up in the middle of the night and she'll realize that her blanket has been pulled down and she's being fondled by an unseen force. And Stan Winston did the effects in this movie, and it's amazing. They have a fake body, and there's like handprints appear on her body, and it is so unnerving. Like, I could only imagine, you know, being a woman and watching it. It's bad enough being a guy watching it. Yeah. It is one of the creepiest movies you'll ever see. Unfortunately, the DVD is out of print, but you can maybe find it at like a library, a rental store,
or Scarecrow.
Scarecrow, you can definitely find it. Yeah. But if you're not in Seattle, you might have to go on eBay.
Travel to Scarecrow. If you aren't going to Scarecrow, regardless of where you live, you're crazy.
That's true. That's true. If you want to own, though, you might have to be paying up to $50 on eBay. It's that out of print.
It's good. My next one is Wreck, the Spanish film. That was the inspiration
for Quarantine.
You know, it was directed by Juan Balaguer and Paco Plaza.
Good job. Good try.
Good enough. Close enough, yeah. I feel like I should have gotten closer. But the basic premise is, you know, a TV reporter is sort of just doing a regular report, and then she gets sucked in on this event and can't escape.
Yeah, exactly. She's doing a newscast about, you know, what happens at fire stations when you're asleep, like kind of just a cheesy infotainment kind of thing. And then all of a sudden they get a call that there's something going on at this apartment complex. She goes with them, and they get, you know, they get quarantined in, hence the remake title.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like just
and it's a zombie outbreak.
Yeah, an innocuous kind of thing, you know, just like a regular fire thing. So she tags along, but quickly things escalate into a creepy realm as you sort of like, what is going on? Why can't we leave this building? Because you don't know what's going on outside. Yeah. You don't know what's going on inside. I think it's better than the remake.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, it's become a whole franchise in and of itself. They're at least
part 2's out, and they're talking about part 3.
There's at least a 3 and a 4 that I've heard discussion of. So it's become a whole franchise. So.
Yeah, and last week we were talking about scariest moments, and one that we didn't mention, the ending of Wreck, is one of the scariest moments I have ever seen. The effect that they use for the zombie in the ending, either they found the most emaciated person ever, like just the skinniest, lankiest guy this side of Doug Jones, like even skinnier, or it was just a zombie. It was a dead person that they filmed.
And I will say that the remake's ending is good too. The problem with that was they gave it away in the trailers. Like, everybody knew it was going to happen, so... I mean,
it's the same ending pretty much. The final shots.
Right, but like they gave it away. Like, this is the problem. And, you know, that's just dumb filmmaking right there.
Oh, definitely. So my number 3 is a movie that we did talk about last week in Scariest Moments, and that is 1979's Tourist Trap. Now, this was an early movie produced by Charles Band, who later went on to do the Puppet Master series, and Full Moon Studios is his whole big thing. A lot of straight-to-video kind of stuff about little things. But in this movie, he kind of does this nice amalgam of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Carrie, where it's really
both good films.
The kind of the whole feel of it and the idea of the plot is a lot like Texas Chainsaw. These young people, their car breaks down, they go to this house, which is an old tourist trap. It's been closed down for a long time, and the guy there is trying to help him out, but his creepy brother who lives on the same property might not be so interested in helping him out. And there is just some crazy stuff. And last week I talked about the opening scene where someone goes looking for help, the first one of the group, and he is, you know, besieged by mannequins that seem alive and lead pipes being thrown at him.
You know, it kind of reminds me of his The House of Wax. If you remember that, where they have like the one brother who sort of like seems kind of normal, kind of helpful, but then there's the one really malevolent brother who's
that's the remake of House of Wax, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I never saw that. I would imagine that remake was probably really inspired by Tourist Trap.
Probably.
And it's got some good performances. Chuck Connors plays the elderly guy, helped him out of the tourist trap. He gives a really great performance. Also, Tanya Roberts, who showed up as Donna's mom in that 70s show. Yeah. She's the requisite hottie of the group. And, you know, she looks good.
Yeah, she's young at that point.
And yeah, it's just a really creepy movie. It, unfortunately, got saddled with a PG rating, which I know the director in the commentary on the DVD kind of is, you know, not happy about that because it made people not really take the movie seriously as a horror film. They're looking at the poster and then they see it's rated PG. They're like, maybe I'm not going to watch that. But it is intense. It might not be full of gore or nudity, but it is an intense movie. People should really check it out. And the DVD is cheap. It's like you can find it for $10 on deep discount or something.
Sweet.
Yep.
For my next one, I'm going to talk about Brad Anderson's Session 9.
Really suspenseful movie. I think one of the masters of horror in the millennium.
Brad Anderson has sort of become an indie darling following the success of Session 9. I mean,
The Machinist, Trans-Siberian.
Yeah, so he's sort of continued to be a nice little indie career. He's never really gone too mainstream, so that's cool. But Session 9 was an amazing film. I mean, it got him a little notoriety, but not nearly what it deserves. Session 9 is set in a mental institution. Or abandoned mental institution, which is always a creepy basis.
It is a very creepy environment.
But the weird thing about it is it never really goes the places that predictably those kind of films go. You know, like the avenging ghosts of the patients there coming
like
back.
House on Haunted Hill, or someone, there's still an inmate there, you know, it doesn't go in those slasher ghost kind of ideas.
It sort of runs two tracks of these people as they're removing the asbestos, and as one of the workers has found this group of tapes about the story of this one patient who had something go terribly wrong, and he listens to him gradually building up session by session until it reaches the end and things go haywire, which is Session 9. Great performance, some very unusual people like David Caruso.
Yeah, who would have thought David Caruso had a good movie?
Yeah, so I love the premise. I love the setting. The acting was very good. It was very eerily paced.
Oh yeah, the direction was just smooth and creepy the whole time.
I think it's a great film that was truly underappreciated.
Yeah, it didn't really get much theater play at all. Most people saw it for the first time on DVD.
It's one of those things, much like a lot of the films we're talking about, that is sort of like very popular amongst the people who have seen it and know about it, but it really deserves to be more widely known.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So my number 2 is going back to 1981, the same year as The Entity, was the release of Just Before Dawn. And this was the third of 3 horror films in the late 70s, early 80s, directed by Jeff Lieberman, who I think is one of the most underrated horror directors. Like, to me, he could be featured on the show Masters of Horror if it still existed. He did the killer worm movie Squirm, which is better than it has any right to be, the LSD trip psychosis movie Blue Sunshine, and then Just Before Dawn, which is kind of a throwback to Deliverance mixed with something like The Hills Have Eyes, where these group of kids are going up into the mountains, and they're led by Greg Henry, who played the mayor in Slither in later years, coming back to the horror genre. And he has just inherited a piece of land from a family member, and they're going up to check it out. Little do they know, inbred killer hillbillies. Wouldn't you know it?
That's a problem. That is one of those things that when you go to remote locations always seems a little weird.
And even the local sheriff, played by George Kennedy, can't help him. He tries to warn him, you know, maybe don't go up in that area. It's not very well inhabited. I'm far away. And they're like, oh, that's okay. We'll just keep going. And there are some gruesome things in this movie. Like, it's definitely kind of akin to some of the savage cinema movies of the 70s, like Hills Have Eyes, where there's a shot. So in most slasher movies, maybe someone will be stabbed in the stomach and they'll fall down dead. In this movie, a man is stabbed in the groin, and then the implement that he is stabbed with proceeds to stay in his groin and saw back and forth for a few seconds before he finally dies. And that's in the opening scene of the movie.
That's mighty unpleasant, yeah.
And it's not just about the gore, although there are some great gore gags. There are some really suspenseful scenes. In one of them, a girl is swimming in this pool, and there's a waterfall behind her. So she's in this kind of lake, enclosed pool kind of area thing. And through the waterfall, you see the hulking killer appear, like out of the cave. And then he goes underwater. And she's just there, totally oblivious. And then all of a sudden, she's like, hey, stop it. Like, stop grabbing at my leg. What are you doing? And then her boyfriend pops up out of the water in front of her and says, like, what? And she's like, oh my God! It is so suspenseful, and it's just really ingenious. There's a lot of twists in the movie. I don't want to spoil it, but just a lot of the things that you would have loved to have seen in a slasher movie, you know, happen in this movie, and it does things you wouldn't have expected a slasher movie to do. Really worth checking out, and it's got a great DVD put out by Shriek Show with like documentaries and commentaries and stuff.
We love good DVDs, so that's always going to get a plus. My next one is from a known director, but before he was sort of like the entity or commodity that he is now, and that is The Devil's Backbone by Guillermo del Toro.
Very solid ghost story.
You know, again, it's kind of like, if for those who have seen The Orphanage, which he produced, it's got a similar sort of vibe to that, of a kid who goes to an orphanage and is sort of haunted by this ghost entity. But this is like a creepy ghost.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there's also this whole subplot of it's taking place during wartime.
Yes,
and
it's got a big political backstory.
one thing that's interesting is that Del Toro's later production of Pan's Labyrinth, which a lot of people would say, oh, so original, so amazing. If you watch The Devil's Backbone, he already made Pan's Labyrinth about 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
They are, the plot setup, the way it goes back and forth between the reality and the horror, in Pan's Labyrinth's case, fantasy, they are very much in the same world, the same universe, the same tract. But it's not to say one's bad. They're both solid movies. Devil's Backbone more so goes for the scares, and it does a good job.
And the kid, the ghost is a kid in this movie, one of the kids who used to be at the orphanage. And the kid is super creepy.
Well, what happened was he died from a head injury in the water. So every time you see him, you see his head injury, and you see it leaking blood up into the air like he's floating in water. There's always like this kind of water effect around him, and it is so unnerving. Like, it's something so unnatural that you've never seen before.
And you know, I mean, I like The Orphanage as well. It's a very good film. Maybe that's even one of those underrated type films.
Oh, definitely.
But
agree.
this Orphanage is even more creepy to me. Like, I think it's he said it's one of his projects he's been most passionate about.
Very personal.
He really loves it, and it's a wonderful film. Should definitely check it out. It's great.
Yeah. And so my number one is a movie that I was very disappointed to see not end up on our top 31 horror movies of all time, because it was so high up on my list that I was like, well, of course other people are going to put it on theirs. I don't think anyone else put it on their list from the writing staff of the MacGuffin. And my number one is 1987's Near Dark. And that was the directing debut of Kathryn Bigelow, who just won the Oscar for The Hurt Locker. And I think it's her best movie.
You know, it's interesting because that occurred, I believe, right after Aliens came out, and so it got all the actors who are in Aliens are sort of reunited in.
And I think that might have something to do with the fact that Kathryn Bigelow was married to James Cameron at the time.
Might have been a little thing to do.
James Cameron, you know, kind of gave her some pointers on directing and also the script. But yeah, so in this movie, you see Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, and Jeanette Goldstein all come back, and they're playing a family of vampires. So I think that camaraderie that they built on the set of Aliens, playing the military group, really paid off, as they're this creepy family of vampires. They travel the countryside, they kill off people, like, you know, in little towns, and then get a move on in their RV with its blacked out windows. But trouble happens when the, you know, unofficial daughter of the family is falls in love with a guy played by Adrian Pastar, and she turns him into a vampire as opposed to just killing him and draining his blood. One thing that's so interesting in this movie, you know, now that we're just inundated with vampires over and over again, in this movie the word vampire is never uttered. They never explain the rules. The vampires don't grow sharp fangs. They don't turn into monsters. They look like people. This could be a roving band of serial killers. They happen to have to live on blood, and when sunlight hits them, they burn up.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things, you know, I like about Let the Right One In, is when, you know, they're talking about, like, they never really use vampire in that movie. She just says, like, I need blood to live, basically. She doesn't really define it. And I like that sort of nebulous thing, you know, because vampires have such a unfortunate connotation thanks to like Twilight and stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
and unfortunately, one really bad thing, the only bad thing I can think of associated with Near Dark is that they have since re-released like the DVD and Blu-ray in a very Twilight-esque cover. Like the faces are very Robert Pattinson, like all sleek, and the way he's positioned on the cover, it doesn't look good. It looks like a recent Twilight ripoff as opposed to a classic 80s movie.
I like that element of mystery though, where you don't know exactly what's going on. You kind of think it's like this thing, but they never say it's that thing. So
yeah, and also, you know, as we saw in The Hurt Locker or Strange Days, the other movies she's directed, very good action directors. So you have,
I mean, Point Break, like.
So you have very good horror scenes, good performances, but there's also some great action. There's a scene where the family of vampires, they go stay at hotels, because obviously they don't have one single location.
Vampires would stay,
so they black out the windows in this hotel, and they're sleeping during the day. Unfortunately, that's when cops catch up with them, knock on the door, and what can they do? They can't leave, so they start shooting. Well, the cops start shooting back, and they're blowing holes in the windows, blowing holes in the walls, and the sunlight's coming in, so they have to be avoiding the sunlight while also trying to kill these cops and figuring out a way to get away. It is an awesome action scene, and I think this movie really should be checked out.
And she's a great director, so give her support. She definitely deserves it.
Yeah, she definitely earned her Oscar finally.
Yeah. I guess my last one is a personal one for me. I remember seeing it in second grade and being freaked out when I saw it. It was
bad movie to see in second grade, I think.
It was one of the first movies that really scared me, I will say. You know, like I saw Psycho when I was a kid. My mom showed it to me, and I didn't find that scary at all. But this one genuinely freaked me out, and that's Arachnophobia.
It is such a scary movie.
It's weird. It gets a bad rap because, you know, Steven Spielberg was a producer on it, I believe.
It's directed by Frank Marshall.
And so, like, it's got comedy elements and stuff like that. It's got a little bit of cheese to it. But the thing that I think is most interesting, and I'm surprised it hasn't been done more, is arachnophobia, I believe, is the #1 phobia of all. More people are afraid of spiders than anything else.
Yeah.
And so it's the perfect basis to create a scary film on, because everybody can innately understand that fear.
Oh, definitely. I am horrified of spiders. And one thing Arachnophobia does so well is that they use real spiders. And the whole plot of the movie, like, the point is not that it's a giant spider, like in Tarantula or something.
No.
And that's a problem that people have been doing for years. They make them gigantic. Well, as soon as something's gigantic, it's not relatable. A swarm of little spiders is infinitely more scary than one giant one.
It's scary, and the other thing that's interesting is that they actually set a plausible sort of explanation for how these spiders occur and why
they're vicious and stuff like that,
and how they got there. So it makes sense that you're able to embrace and be like, it's weird, but this is sort of a plausible scenario. I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff in the rainforest that nobody knows about. Could there be crazy, evil, large spiders?
Yeah. And there are just so many great scare moments in this movie that make me rethink how I do certain things in my life. There's a scene where a woman goes to turn off a lamp and a spider jumps down.
Yeah.
To this day, the lamp by my door, I will put my hand in there and be like, man, the spider better not jump down. People eating bowl of popcorn with the spider inside. Man, F that. I have not eaten a bowl of popcorn since then.
I had that added element. I grew up in New Mexico, and in New Mexico, there are things like, we had like black widows in our houses. So like,
why are you still alive? I would have killed myself long ago if I grew up with black widows.
I don't know. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. But it just played so well upon these sort of built-in fears, and I think it's a great thing. I think, you know, was it Jeff Daniels?
Oh, one of his best performances, I think. He's so great as the guy who had the childhood trauma of the spider.
It's got a very eclectic cast. Harley, Jane Kozak, Julian Sands, John
Warlock.
Goodman. Yeah, I mean, there's a very eclectic cast, but they come together so well, and, you know, it's scary, it's real.
Yeah.
You better watch out. Those spiders might be coming for you.
Definitely. And I think just to throw a shout out to another movie, you know, didn't make my top 5, but in the realm of arachnophobia, Kingdom of the Spiders is another movie where they use real tarantulas. It's a swarm of tarantulas going after William Shatner, and it was made in the 70s, just as horrifying as Arachnophobia.
And I'll say, you know, it does take skill to do it well, because The Craft did it. And they didn't do it well, so...
That had spiders in it? I thought it was about witches.
Well, they all the creatures at the end of the movie
I never
real.
watched it. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I remember this purely because I went to one of those theaters, and they had the questions on there doing, like, trivia. Did you know that The Craft used 400,000 spiders, 57 snakes, blah, 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 blah.
Really? They had a question about The Craft. Was it a month after The Craft came out?
Probably.
Okay.
It's probably very timely, or before or after. But I remember that, and then I saw the movie, and I was like, okay, I see what they're talking about now. not nearly as well done, if you ask me. But.
All right. So those are our top 5 underrated horror films of all time. If you have any movies that we didn't mention, if you like the movies we talked about, if we're crazy about what we talked about, MacGuffinPodcast.com is that scary little place where you can find all that info.
And the scariest movies are listed by the MacGuffin staff every day. So find out what probably the top 29 at this point or whatever.
Yeah.
So
we're getting down to the wire. Yeah. A new one every day.
What is going to be the scariest or top horror film for all of the MacGuffin staff? Find out.
T-1000 can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. Magneto can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. Even Zod can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. It's tight. Don't even try to bite the side of style. Mr. Spock can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. The Wrath of Khan can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. The Borg can't stop me. I'm on fire tonight. Because I've got space game and it feels alright.